I have significant news to unpack today, and if you have been tracking this stabilizing brace fight, you will understand why this moment lands differently. After months of injunctions, fragmented protections, and uncertainty for ordinary owners who wanted a straight answer, the clouds have parted enough to see the landscape. The rule that tried to sweep most braced pistols into short-barreled rifle territory is no longer wobbling. For now, it is off the board. Agencies are aligning with what the court said, and the practical effect is becoming clear. Before we chase the newest filings, a quick refresher keeps us honest about how we arrived here. In early 2023, the Federal Firearms Agency issued a final rule reclassifying many pistols fitted with stabilizing braces as short-barreled rifles under the NFA, turning millions of configurations into potential legal traps unless owners registered, modified, or abandoned them. Lawsuits sprang up, and the map filled with preliminary injunctions, member carve-outs, and enforcement that started and stopped. It created a patchwork hurting clarity and compliance, and people asked, what applies? The first seismic break arrived when Judge Reed O'Connor in the Northern District of Texas moved beyond preliminary skirmishing and issued a merits decision that vacated the rule. His analysis focused on administrative law and the Administrative Procedure Act's logical outgrowth requirement. The government cannot propose one thing and then finalize something materially different without fair notice and a chance to comment. On that record, he concluded the rule failed that test, so the remedy was vacatur rather than a narrow injunction, pulling the rule off the field. Because the prior administration had defended the rule, the government appealed to the Fifth Circuit, urging the court to defer to the agency's interpretation and to treat any defects as policy questions. While that appeal sat on the calendar, district courts kept issuing and extending protections, and everyone watched the docket like it was the playoffs, wondering whether the panel would trim the remedy, affirm the vacatur, or remand. The stakes were clear: a nationwide vacatur on one side and a confusing patchwork on the other. Then the political ground shifted, and with it, the litigation posture changed. The Department of Justice, under new leadership, reviewed the landscape, weighed the district court's reasoning, recognized procedural vulnerabilities baked into the rulemaking, and measured the chaos that enforcement would inflict on owners and industry. Instead of pressing the Fifth Circuit to argument, DOJ filed a stipulation to dismiss its appeal in the case that produced the merits vacatur. In appellate terms, it is a dismissal. In plain English, the government chose not to fight the rule. This was no symbolic shrug buried in a footnote. Almost in tandem, a separate challenge that had been paused while the Fifth Circuit drama played out returned with an acknowledgement: the rule is set aside nationwide. The agency even pulled slide deck materials that attempted to operationalize the now vacated factors in the field. Agencies do not erase how-to guides when they plan to resume enforcement next week, and parties do not voluntarily dismiss cases when they think the government will reassert that position. Signals and actions match the words.
That is why the tone of this update is different from earlier check-ins, where every sentence needed caveats. Back then, we juggled injunctions for certain members, carve-outs for specific companies, and calendars full of arguments that might slip. Now we have a dismissed appeal, a standing vacatur, and acknowledgments the rule is not enforceable. I am not declaring a forever victory because administrative law rarely does. If you ask whether enforcement is the plan today, the answer is that government actions align with a nationwide vacatur, not enforcement. As always, the promise here is simple. Read the documents, follow the orders, and explain what changes today and what might change tomorrow. If that practical approach helps you breathe easier through the noise, make sure you are subscribed and share this update with someone who needs an accurate summary. In the next segment, I will connect the remaining dots: how the APA analysis steers what comes next, why dropping the appeal is win, and where other cases fit, so the headline becomes a map for the road ahead. Moving deeper into this update, it is worth tracing the lawsuits that orbit around the vacated brace rule, because each one played a distinct role. When Judge O'Connor issued his district court decision in the mock case, The immediate question was what would happen on appeal. The government filed its notice, but then chose to retreat once the political leadership turned over. That single act shifted the weight of multiple other challenges because so many courts had paused or conditioned their proceedings on the outcome of the appeal. The signal was plain. If the appeal was gone, the foundation for holding other cases in abeyance collapsed as well. Consider the FRAC case, which gathered not only an industry manufacturer in SB Tactical, but also 25 states that aligned against the agency. That collection of sovereigns, along with the trade association, created a broad front. The case sat still while the appellate process in mock wound its way through scheduling. Once the dismissal notice dropped, parties in FRAC returned to court with the joint stipulation. The rule was vacated, the agency had acknowledged it, and there was nothing left to litigate. They dismissed voluntarily, which is a powerful statement in itself. Plaintiffs do not surrender a cause unless the battlefield already reflects their victory. The voluntary dismissal in FRAC also carried another message. When a coalition of states, a manufacturer, and an advocacy group can step away confident that their interests are secured, it reinforces that the vacatur is not a local or symbolic thing. It is nationwide in its application. Agencies pulled down training materials and references that would otherwise be cited by field officers. That is how you know the vacatur is real. Practical adjustments follow the courtroom order. Meanwhile, in the Fifth Circuit's jurisdiction, other challenges had been building, cases brought by Gun Owners of America, the National Association for Gun Rights, and individuals like in the Brito case. These suits produced preliminary injunctions along the way, offering protection for members or plaintiffs. Once the government ceded in mock, the question became whether these remaining cases would continue as vehicles to press for broader precedents. For now, they appear to be losing steam because the practical relief everyone sought is already on the table: non-enforcement of the rule.
Judge O'Connor's decision in mock deserves a closer look because it explains why the agency faced such difficulty defending its process. The court walked carefully through the proposed rule and the final rule, showing that the differences were not minor tweaks but substantial changes. The Administrative Procedure Act requires logical continuity so the public is not blindsided. By skipping that step, the agency undermined the foundation of its action. The court emphasized that the final rule was legislative in character, not interpretive, which meant compliance with the APA was mandatory. In the absence of that compliance, the only lawful option was to vacate. That analysis is not revolutionary, but it is decisive. It also underscores why a future administration, if motivated, could attempt a new brace rule by tightening the procedural screws. That possibility tempers the celebration. This win is genuine and significant, but it rests on specific flaws in one rulemaking process. It is not a Supreme Court holding barring brace regulation in perpetuity. Owners, manufacturers, and organizations must recognize both sides of the coin. Immediate relief today, but not an ironclad shield tomorrow. For those tracking the short-barreled rifle classification issue, the immediate impact cannot be overstated. Individuals no longer face the pressure of a registration deadline under this rule. Manufacturers like SB Tactical regain the space to operate without clouded legality hanging over products. States that aligned in opposition can assure residents the rule is not enforceable within their borders or anywhere else. The chilling effect that uncertainty imposed begins to thaw, and ordinary people have clearer guidance on what is permissible. That clarity matters because compliance is only possible when rules are understandable and stable. Shifting definitions of what counts as a rifle versus a pistol do not serve public safety when they change retroactively. Vacating the rule restores predictability, at least for the moment. The fact that multiple lawsuits converged on the same result also builds public confidence.
It was not one rogue judge, but a consistent pattern of injunctions and now a final merits ruling unchallenged on appeal. Still, one must keep eyes on the horizon. The dismissal of the appeal means no binding appellate precedent emerges. Future administrations might feel emboldened to revisit the issue, banking on improved rulemaking tactics. That is why attention cannot lapse simply because today's news is good. Understanding how administrative law functions is the key to anticipating what comes next. Agencies can learn from defeat and try again, but courts can also build on reasoning if new cases arise. For now, the atmosphere has shifted. What once felt like a looming enforcement hammer now feels like an open space where the rule has collapsed. In the next portion, I will dive into the long-term implications, the risks that linger despite victory, and why staying engaged is critical even after hearing that a nationwide vacatur is in place.
As we step into the longer view, it is important to weigh both the victory that sits on the table today and the limitations that accompany it. Dropping the appeal, conceding that the rule is vacated, and watching multiple lawsuits dissolve is the quickest path to relief. Owners no longer need to live under the immediate fear of enforcement. Manufacturers see their products back in circulation without the cloud of reclassification. States that fought the rule can claim success on behalf of their citizens. But the story cannot end with a sigh of relief, because the manner in which the win came about carries implications for the future. The dismissal of the appeal means the vacatur stands, but it also means the reasoning lives only in a district court opinion. Judge O'Connor's analysis is strong, but it is not binding outside his court, and it does not create circuit precedent. That absence matters, because when a future administration contemplates a similar regulation, it will face no controlling appellate decision that forbids the effort. The government could try again, correcting the procedural mistakes that doomed the last attempt. That is why I call this the fastest and easiest win, but not the deepest or most durable. The heart of O'Connor's opinion rested on the APA's logical outgrowth test. He pointed out that the agency's proposed rule and the final rule diverged significantly, leaving the public without proper notice or opportunity to comment. By cutting that corner, the agency violated the APA, and vacatur was the appropriate remedy. Yet that defect is not inherent in all brace rules forever. A new administration, with careful drafting, a consistent proposed and final rule, and a complete comment period, could potentially craft a regulation that survives the same test. That possibility is why advocates warn against complacency. For the moment, though, relief is real. The agency has acknowledged that the brace rule is invalid, pulled materials from its website, and ceased enforcement. That acknowledgement is more than formality. It is the practical guarantee that individuals and businesses are safe from sudden prosecution under a void rule. The voluntary dismissal by multiple plaintiffs reinforces that this is not just a pause, but a genuine conclusion to this round of litigation. Courts do not close cases unless the central issue has been resolved to the satisfaction of both sides. Looking forward, the challenge is preparation. If another administration, hostile to braces or similar accessories, takes power, the temptation will be strong to attempt a new rule. Advocates must be ready to scrutinize proposed texts, mobilize during comment periods, and litigate if procedural or substantive defects arise again. The past cycle demonstrates that vigilance works. When agencies overstep or ignore statutory limits, courts can and do strike rules down. But vigilance requires continued attention even after a headline win.
There is also a cultural element in play. Victories in court strengthen confidence among owners and organizations, but they can also create overconfidence. It is tempting to assume that one vacatur insulates the community forever. That assumption is dangerous. The right way to read the current posture is as breathing room, not permanent insulation. The law remains contested ground, and the outcome depends on who holds power and how carefully rules are drafted. So, the long-term message is twofold. First, today's win is substantial. It clears away uncertainty, protects ordinary people, and affirms that agencies cannot rewrite definitions without following the law. Second, the win is provisional in scope. The door remains open for future efforts, and the lack of appellate precedent leaves room for new battles. That is why awareness and preparedness remain essential. For now, enjoy the relief that comes with a nationwide vacatur, knowing that enforcement has ceased and that the field is clear. But keep eyes open for what comes next. I will continue to track developments, and when new cases or rules emerge, you will hear about them here. This nation was built by armed scholars, and it will be maintained by armed scholars who understand both the victories of today and the challenges of tomorrow.